So before jumping into the presentation, I just wanted to run through a brief summary of CLF for those who might be new and provide some of our contact information. So CLF DC is a local hub of the larger Carbon Leadership Forum. We organize events that empower industry professionals to radically reduce embodied carbon from buildings and infrastructure. And CLF focuses in these 4 areas. So research, resources, network, and initiatives. We're always looking to grow our community. So please, if you're interested in any of these topics, interested in volunteering, or if you have any future presentation ideas, we would love to hear from you. So you can join our mailing list on our website, which will ensure you receive emails about any events we're hosting. You can also email us directly with any questions or if you're interested in volunteering. And then we have a link to our CLFDC forum, which can be used to ask questions and get answers from local professionals. And then finally, you could follow us on LinkedIn. We've been posting a lot of different articles on sustainability and embodied carbon, as well as future events, so feel free to join us there. So our session today will be divided into 2 parts. So first we'll have Radhika walk us through decarbonization of the cement and concrete sectors, followed by a Q&A. And then we'll have Valentina and Charles talk about the RMI Concrete Solutions guide, followed by a second Q&A. And so before turning it over to Radhika, we wanted to mention that we will have another event in July where we'll be hearing more about MEP 2040. So keep an eye out for a registration link to that event. It'll likely be towards the end of July. And with that, I'll turn it over to Radhika and the rest of the RMI team to kick us off.
Thank you, Ashley. Really appreciate that. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be part of this amazing group of people who want to learn all about cement and concrete decarbonization. We're coming in as RMI to host this roundtable for 2 purposes. We would love to share what we're working on, but we would also love to hear what you're working on if there are ideas that we can learn from you around. So please use this opportunity more as an exchange rather than just a speaking or a panel or like a panel discussion or something like that. Like let's make it interactive. A very quick introduction about me. I'm Radhika Lalit. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of the Mission Possible Partnership, an organization I will talk a little more about in the next few minutes, as well as my second hat is that I am also a manager with RMI and working on our cement and concrete initiative, which again, I will give you a little glimpse of our work here. I've also been joined by my colleagues, Charles Cannon and Valentina Guido, who I will turn over the mic to in the second half of this presentation. But we are going to take the first, as Ashley shared, we are going to use the first half of the presentation to really talk about the landscape, the overview, why cement, why concrete, and then what are we doing as RMI at the global level, as well as, within our cement and concrete strategy within the Institute. We'll then hand over to Charles and Valentina to talk about the 6 actions that you can do in order to decarbonize concrete today, which is a more applied conversation for a lot of you on the line today. We hope for this discussion to be interactive, like I said before, and we are gonna, break between part 1 and part 2 of this discussion, just so we can have any question and answers and or discussion on any topic that you think is important or necessary. So with that, let me start with Mission Possible Partnership and give you an overview of what that is and what are we doing there, what is the theory of change, and then sort of lead you through some of the work that we're doing at RMI, which is relatively new, a newly formed initiative that we've started. So here we go. I think this chart will not come as news to most of you, but industrial decarbonization is super important because we're talking about 30% of global emissions. And these sectors are traditionally known as harder to abate sectors, and not without reason, because each of these sectors does, come with its set of challenges. We look at steel, that's 11% of global emissions. You look at concrete, you're looking at roughly 8 to 9% of global emissions. Trucking is a big one as well. So there are sectors across both mobility and material space that are significant challenges to the climate, the climate crisis overall, and we are here to see how we can contribute to some of the solutions here. So what is not only appalling is that they make a third of the emissions, but also the fact that if we ignore these industries, there's no way on earth we can sort of reach our target of limiting the global warming to less than 2 degrees even. Forget 1.5. And so this is very important from that perspective as well. Like if we do nothing, then there's no way we would be able to accomplish our objectives, because the carbon budget of all these industries is way going to exceed. It'll be more than our remaining carbon budget for 2 degrees. So it's that significant. Now, what is the Mission Possible partnership? So given that these industries, these harder to abate sectors, are a significant challenge, we set up as RMI, and in partnership with the Energy Transitions Commission, We Mean Business Coalition, and the World Economic Forum, we set up a huge platform that's dedicated to accelerating industrial decarbonization globally and across the 7 sectors that are traditionally known as hard to abate. On the materials side, we're looking at steel, cement / concrete, chemicals, and aluminum. And on the transportation side, we're looking at aviation, shipping, and heavy trucking. So these are the 7 sectors that we operate across as MPP. A good way to think about us is we're like a coalition of coalitions, and the platform for industrial decarbonization globally, where we're bringing together not just climate leaders, but also industry and the value chain for our work. So at this point, across the 7 different sectors, we're engaging over 400 corporates and corporate leaders who are really thinking about systemic change for accelerating the decarbonization. So what is our theory of change? We are working across a 4-step process for enabling change in these harder to abate sectors. First is really forging a shared vision. We are convening a high ambition stakeholder group. So within each of these industrial platforms, we're looking at who are the leaders, who are the industry players who are willing to participate in the transition, who see it coming and who would like to be part of the change. We're engaging with the demand side and engaging with major buyers across the value chain. As part of MPP, we helped start something called the First Movers Coalition, which is now creating waves with aggregating demand for these sectors, which were traditionally not thought about. We're also engaging with the financial community through entities like the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, etc. And we're engaging with also governments and government bodies and international, in the whole ecosystem of actors who are engaging within the space, but are thinking about decarbonization. So the first piece is really around creating this high ambition stakeholder group and aligning them on a shared vision, which we've done as part of the 7 platforms that we talked about. The second piece of our theory of change is around creating net zero roadmaps and metrics for change. We recognize that there's a lot of roadmaps out there, but when you speak with the industry, you'll realize that they're not aligned behind those roadmaps. Those roadmaps are predictions of what future could look like, but the industry has seldom been consulted on some of these strategies. And so a part of our work was really solving for that barrier. And at this point, we are going to be launching 7 different sector transition strategies, or think of them as net zero roadmaps, for each of the 7 sectors by COP of this year. We already have released last year and are releasing some of them this year as well. But we released steel, shipping, and aviation last year. And we're building upon those sector transition strategies for the other sectors this year. The third step is really around, once we know what that decarbonization trajectory looks like, to align the different actors and get them to commit to action. And we're doing that by engaging with SBTI, which is the Science Based Target Initiative, as well as several of the financial institutions, the government institutions, as well on the demand side, to ensure that the targets and commitments are aligned to how we can decarbonize by 2050. And then last but definitely not the least is really we're developing practical resource guidance tools to really operationalize on these commitments, help create product standards, labels, basically trying to get markets ready for a new industrial revolution where green is the new future. And so, like I shared, we have 7 different sector platforms. They have all 7 different names. The one that I would like to focus on is concrete specifically. It's called the Concrete Action for Climate. It's a partnership between the World Economic Forum and the Global Cement and Concrete Association. And this is just a short glimpse of, or a small glimpse of, how we're approaching our work within the Concrete Action for Climate. The near-term goals are really around building a coalition of the willing beyond just the industry, but a coalition of the forces across the value chain to help decarbonize this sector. We're launching a sector transition strategy or roadmap, as I talked about, with very clear set of policy asks this year at this COP. We're also building up the demand side signals for procurement by participating in the Industrial Deep Decarbonization Initiative by the Clean Energy Ministerial. Our long-term goals are really to look at every single decarbonization lever that we identify to be material and help create action on all of those accounts. And again, like we have, the Concrete Action for Climate, which is an initiative under MPP, is basically built by the World Economic Forum and the GCCA. And just to give you an idea, the GCCA accounts for 80% of industry within the cement and concrete sector outside of China. So it's the commitment is real, where we are looking to help create a market literally for low carbon cement and concrete. Now, this slide really takes you through, how we're using the different elements of the value chain. And I think this is the secret sauce of MPP, is not just taking industry and forcing them to say you have to decarbonize on your own, but really getting around a table, governments, financial institutions, customers, the demand side, as well as industry leaders and their suppliers, and talk about how we can help enable the transition. Because if the industry could have done it alone, they would have done it long back. The reason they haven't been able to do it is because it requires massive commitment from all sides of the value chain in order to enable change. So I would love to sort of take a minute and sort of go through specifically the work that we are doing on the sector transition strategy, because that is one of our major focuses for this year. And that is also something that RMI is helping to deliver on within MPP, as we are one of the key partners. So let me just give you a glimpse of what do we mean by a sector transition strategy. Yes, it's a report which helps to analyze the different what if scenarios of the lowest cost to decarbonization. What is the fastest abatement scenario when you look at the techno-economic analysis of decarbonization scenarios and strategies. And then sort of also sharing in earnest what are some of the bottlenecks for the transition. And this is a report that we are working on collectively with the different partners, the Energy Transitions Commission, the GCCA, RMI is obviously leading that work, as well as ECRA and the World Economic Forum more broadly. So that's the first piece, is developing these scenarios and putting them down in a report. The second piece of the deliverable that we think that is very important is really the archetype explorer, which is what if there was a tool that could help you see different plant level assets and how they're performing and what the decarbonization strategy for each of these would be. And this is really based off of our work on the scenarios and translating it to literally an online interactive tool. So that's what we're also working on, and it will be launched by COP. And then the third piece is really an open source Python model. And what that really means is we're basically taking all our data and putting it out there in the ether to help enable not just industry leaders to understand and model the transition, but also have them have finance look at it and run their portfolio alignment methodologies, have demand side look at it and understand like what the scenarios to decarbonization look like for them to be able to understand the different demand side scenarios as well. So those are the three things that we're working on within MPP when I say sector transition strategy. Now, let me quickly take the focus to RMI Cement and Concrete Initiative and what we're doing here. Again, I'm going to skim through the slide rather quickly because I feel like everybody on this call is already aware. But it's amazing to me that concrete is the most widely used substance on the planet after water, and yet we aren't doing as much as we can or should rather to help decarbonize this sector. It's like around 8 to 9% of the global emissions, ranging between 7 and 9. I think the number is out on that, but it's the only sector. If it was a country, its emissions would be largest after China and India and the US. So the share of this sector is substantial in the global greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Yet it is one of the sectors where solutions haven't been scaled to the level that we need. I thought a fun fact that I would share with this group was, literally producing a ton of clinker can require around 3.3 to 5.7 gigajoules of energy, which is enough to drive a Toyota Corolla for about 1,200 to 2,100 miles. I thought that's a pretty fun number to think about. And not just that, I feel like concrete production also requires water, sand, gravel, all of which are precious natural resources. And so this is a sector that we really need to look at apart from the other ones and find solutions for. And again, most of you will already know this, but the main emissions that are coming from concrete are from cement. Cement manufacturing contributes to 77% of the total emissions arising from the life cycle of cement and concrete. And if you had to sort of break that down of like, okay, within cement, how do you break down where the emissions are coming from? No surprises. It's basically the chemical process of carbonate decomposition. It's the fuel combustion piece, as well as the electricity use piece. That's the most important. If you had to focus on the top two, I think we would solve the problem substantially. But like I said, it isn't easy. It's challenging because there are relatively few technology options readily available in the market for deep emission reductions, and the economic incentives to reduce the emissions are rather limited in the absence of carbon pricing. So without carbon pricing, let's say CCS or CCUS doesn't make as much sense as you would like it to. So what is RMI doing about it? We are starting a new program on cement and concrete, building off of the great work of Charles, Valentina, and our buildings team. And we're focusing on the following 5 levers of change. We are looking at action-oriented roadmaps. So I talked about the sector transition strategy. We're building a global model with GCCA and Mission Possible partnership. So that's the action-oriented roadmaps piece. But we're also sort of translating those roadmaps to a country level and helping create roadmaps for India, China, and also potentially the US. The second piece of our levels of decarbonization of how we think about this is we really do need to invest time to create a market for low carbon cement and concrete. And for that, we need to standardize how we think about low carbon cement and concrete in terms of definitions. How do we help build emissions transparency for the emissions that are kind of across the value chain? How do we account for it, essentially? And if we have been able to account for it, could we create like a book and claim registry, which will then allow people to trade the green aspects of this commodity? We're also looking at using the demand side around the green public procurement best practices, and also developing pilots with governments such as in India to do a green public procurement best practice framework as well as implementation pilot. So that's something that we're thinking about. On the alternative fuel side, we just talked about that around 30% of the emissions are 35% of the emissions are coming from the fuel you use. And in most countries, including the US, including India, including China, the 3 key markets for cement and concrete, you are looking at coal as the fuel use. So we are looking at solutions around policy mandates on fuel mix for cement production. We're looking at, can we create a market-based solution that is kind of a marketplace of waste to then serve as a fuel for this sector, because cement industry basically can burn through anything, which is without any residue, which is the most beautiful part of this sector. Next, this is a very India-specific intervention, but we are looking at creating a net zero buildings accelerator in India with the government, where we are working with a major real estate developer such as the Lodha Group to implement net zero building strategies, specifically around embodied carbon and its procurement. So that's something that we're working within India on. And last but not the least, we're looking at two different concepts around innovation. One is really, can we start a cohort with RMI's third derivative team, which is both an accelerator and a venture fund, to really help startups understand the novel or support startups in the ecosystem who have novel cement chemistries to figure out how they can scale. And then also potentially launching an innovation prize on cement/concrete, but that is work in progress and we're still thinking through that. So those are some of the things that we're doing at RMI, but let me just now pause and share how how you can use this larger information for and use the work that we've done on the cement or the concrete solutions guide, and hand it over to my colleagues Charles and Valentina to really take you through the 6 actions for how we can decarbonize. We could also pause for a break right now if anyone has questions, but otherwise I'm happy to hand it over to my colleagues.
Thanks, Radhika. Yeah, if anyone has any questions and they want to come in and chat or just unmute themselves, please do so now. Well, if any questions further coming up in chat as we're moving through the presentation, we'd certainly welcome them, and we'll be able to answer a chunk of them near the end of the time we have together. We're not going to lay too much more content in you. This last bit should take around 15 minutes. Really appreciate Radhika setting the grander stage for the challenge that cement and concrete decarbonization presents us globally. My colleague Valentina and I last year published a report on the called the Concrete Solutions Guide, which was US-centric and focused on kind of market-ready solutions to decarbonize concrete in the here and now. And we will step you through that now, first by going over the solutions guide and its structure, the 6 solutions we went through, and the stakeholder groups we targeted. We'll go into detail on just 3 of the solutions, and then step into Q&A after that. And so in the next slide, thank you. As I had mentioned, this is the Concrete Solutions Guide was written in response to the demand for low carbon products across sectors, but also recognizing that the concrete sector is still at a bit of a tipping point of using tools at its disposal to lower the embodied carbon in concrete. And we looked at 6 of those. And I believe I'll pass to my colleague Valentina to step through those.
Yes, thank you, Charles. So yeah, in this slide is an overview of the 6 solutions that we describe and propose in the guide. As Charles said, the guide is focused on near-term solutions that propose the use of market-ready technologies and push for communication among stakeholders and collaboration. So the first is performance-oriented specifications. As opposed to prescriptive requirements, these specifications describe the performance rather than the mix ratio. So by doing this, they allow to innovate in mixes and practically translating more room for deploying supplementary cementitious materials and for substituting cement, which is in fact our second solution. So SCMs can actually lower the embodied carbon by replacing cement with materials such as limestone and fly ash, among others. that have lower embodied carbon, and we'll give you a bit more detail in just a second. Our third solution are sensors, which are not a new solution, not an innovative one, but can have benefits, especially when SCMs are deployed in terms of saving time, money, and materials. They provide an opportunity to innovate on the mixes while monitoring the quality of concrete in real time. The fourth solution we propose is concrete recycling, which is about using recycled concrete as an aggregate substitution. Although this solution in particular has a smaller impact in terms of emission reduction, it presents cost benefits and avoids a work stream that would otherwise be a burden. Our fifth solution is carbon sequestration, which revolves around using CO2 from other sources for mixing or curing of the concrete, and by doing so allows to offset some of the emissions. Our last solution is decarbonization of kiln technology. In fact, this solution recognizes that 90% of the emissions derive from the heat source used at kilns, which is most commonly fossil fuels. So we recognize that CCS and zero carbon fuel in the long term could be developed and brought to a stage where they can be used widely. But for now, we propose fuel switching, for example, to biomass, oxygen enrichment, or just simply energy efficiency upgrades as solutions that can be adopted in the short term and have immediate benefits. So in the next slide, we give an overview of the 6 stakeholders that we identified in the guide. In fact, the 6 solutions we propose focus on a broad range of stakeholders and, as I said, encourage collaboration among them. We recognize that the concrete value chain is very fragmented and dynamic, so we believe that all these actors have a role to play to reduce the embodied carbon of concrete. So here is an overview of the 6 stakeholders that we identified. We also defined the potential for each of them, the potential role they can each play to reduce the embodied carbon of concrete. I will give you just a few seconds to take a look and spot yourself on the slide. So I'll just say that the way we frame the way we outline the guide is we try to link each solution to each of these stakeholders. So you will find in the guide a link to each of these. And so, yeah.
And sorry, just before we leave that slide, I'd invite folks in chat to just put in chat what stakeholder group they identify as. And if it's a different one, we're happy to hear that as well. But that'll help shape the next bit of content so we can make sure we're hitting the things that y'all are thinking about as you move through buildings projects.
Yeah, let's see. It would be interesting to read. So we have a few designers, concrete producers, contractors. There seems to be a variety. That's interesting. So, you know, as you look at this slide, we invite you to think about a project where you had a conversation with all of these stakeholders. A time where you could really talk to each of these and engage them throughout the project you were working on. If not many examples come to mind, this is probably a good reminder that collaboration is crucial to decarbonizing the industry, and that conversations to adopt lower embodied carbon solutions should start really at the beginning of the process. So yeah, thank you for all these answers in chat. Moving on to our next slide. So for today, we decided to take the perspective of concrete producers, recognizing that it might be more interesting and more relevant for this audience. But of course, although we structured the presentation around these solutions have applications for and are relevant for all the stakeholders that we mentioned in terms of our audience. So we will present today SCMs a bit more in detail, sensors, and carbon sequestration, and of course are happy to discuss any other solution during our Q&A. So with this, I will now pass it to Charles to walk us through SCMs.
Thanks, Valentina. So supplementary cementitious materials, as Vale mentioned, allow us to replace cement in our mixes, cement being the most carbon intensive and also the most expensive material in most cases in a blend. This is very useful. ASTM specified a few type 1 variants as far back as 2012 with some mix specifications for limestone, fly ash, and blast furnace slag as 3 kind of primary SCMs, but there's also natural pozzolans, ground glass, and some innovative design around kind of next generation SCMs that can be used to further reduce cement content in mixes. So we've done some analysis. Sorry, I'm going to spend just a little more time on SCMs. We've done some analysis looking at what levels of substitution we can achieve on kind of a broad geographic scale. And we found that to be around 40%, which is similar of where the line is drawn for fly ash maximum substitution in ASTM standards. But that's when recognizing that ground granulated blast furnace slag can be introduced in much higher proportions, and limestone is limited to much lower proportions. On this map on the left, you can see the small red dots are cement plants, and the broader semi-transparent circles are coal plants with their volume of fly ash production. So we see here on the eastern side of the country, fly ash is a little bit more readily available. However, it really varies by geography. And what's interesting is the electricity sector decarbonizes that removes fly ash as a byproduct to be used in concrete decarbonization. So while it is a limited resource, there's questions around like the grading and quality of different fly ashes. They're not all made equal. There's also a significant store of fly ash, and we're starting to see some companies develop businesses off of processing fly ash ponds that have been piling up for decades to make the best use of this resource as we're transitioning out of our, as we're decarbonizing our electricity grid. The last thing I'll mention with SCMs is just for the number of designers here on the call and for some of the contractors, is the interaction with performance-oriented specifications. So when you introduce SCMs into a concrete blend, it'll handle differently. It'll spread differently, and you know, the next solution will touch in some on-site solutions for how to address those variabilities. But an important design aspect is being able to extend the strength timeframes out to 60-day, 80-day, or later. It provides a significant amount of flexibility in the design. Now that does introduce some scheduling practicalities when actually going and building the project. But we've found that if you can reduce the strength qualifications in the earliest days, you really have a lot of opportunities to use more innovative blends. And I'm sure some of the concrete producers on the line can speak to their creativity when given a broader canvas to work with. And I'll pass to Vale for the next one.
Thank you, Charles. Yes, so our solution here, we're focusing a little bit more on sensors. As I said, sensors are not a new solution. They've been around for a while, but we recognize their particular application when SCMs are used. In fact, although SCM specifications have been around for a long time and their adoption is increasing, some contractors are still new to them and happen to work with them for the first time. And you might recognize yourself in this pool or not. So we're happy to hear more from your direct experience during Q&A later on. And when SCMs are used, the curation time, as I'm sure you know, can vary compared to type 1 concrete, and this poses some challenges. So sensors can be helpful here because they allow for real-time monitoring and eliminate the on-site guesswork. Sensors can, in fact, assuage the concerns on the strength of concrete and can, as a result, promote the adoption of low carbon mixes. They provide accurate information on the status of concrete and allow to know exactly when to move to the next phase of the construction process, which also does not compromise the safety of the workers on site. So one last thing I'll mention is that depending on slab size and staff, sensors can also provide some cost benefits. Our last solution here that we'll mention today is carbon sequestration in concrete. Although this is still a maturing technology, we'll mention it here because we believe that it has some potential for developing in the next future. Applications with consistently positive and verified climate benefits have yet to be proven and deployed at scale, as a 2020 Nature article pointed out. There are a few challenges around this technology. One of the biggest one being around CO2 sourcing. In fact, if not done correctly and from convenient locations, the emissions deriving from the sourcing of the CO2 itself could offset some of the climate benefits resulting from this technology. So that's something to be mindful about. Also, there are a few concerns on the performance of concrete itself, which remains to be seen in the long term, how the actual sequestration potential is. We nonetheless inserted this technology here because several companies are leading in this space and continue to push research and development. And as I said, there is potential for this technology to develop and to provide some climate benefits in the next future. And with this, I'll hand it over back to Charles.
Thanks, Valentina, and grateful for the questions that are already starting to trickle in, and the conversations. I saw one question in chat just specifically addressing some of the other folks in the room, and that's really from our work in the Concrete Solutions Guide. What our key takeaway was that collaboration among stakeholders will drive and advance innovation. There was another mention in chat of just being engaged early in the process, how it creates so many opportunities to deliver more creative solutions. I think one of the greatest challenges of cement and concrete decarbonization is also one of its greatest strengths, in that each building is so unique and each application of concrete is so specific based on your blend type, what stakeholders you have involved. It's hard to say that there's one solution that fits all and look at kind of top down, but at the same time, it gives every person in this room an immense power to drive decarbonization. If they send an email early and say, hey, can we sit down and talk about this project before we really get going in our design process, or even just meeting twice a year with your concrete producer and seeing what's coming around the bend, what they've been seeing in the market with different blends and use, really provides a tremendous opportunity to decarbonize. And I believe that is our last slide. It is. So with that, I will pop open this chat, and I see Valentina has already quoted something from our Concrete Solutions Guide on ASTM standards for use of sensors. Vali, do you want to expand on that? Yeah, sure. So I started from that question. I see a question on sensors being acceptable by code and regulators. This is the ASTM standard that we mentioned in our guide. So just an example, the requirement is for 3 sensors for the first 1,000 square feet, and then at least 1 sensor for every remaining 1,000 square feet. So we took the example of a 10,000 square feet slab of concrete, which would require 12 sensors, costing less than $1,000 in total, taking the average price of a sensor in the industry right now. So hopefully that helps. Any follow-up question on this? I see one more in here of project examples in which a sensor is used in lieu of a cylinder. We don't know of any projects where it's used in lieu of a cylinder for on-site testing, but rather in combination with. The cylinder test is tried and true, but having those sensors in slab or in situ on site really gives you that minute-to-minute information of when you can move into your next project step.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to hear from the audience if anyone has examples, project examples that they would like to share about using sensors on site. Does anyone have any direct experience using sensors? Anything relevant that they like to share? Okay. Seems like no. Let's go back maybe to the beginning of the Q&A, the questions in chat. I see Jared had a question on for concrete producer and contractors. As designers, we can easily specify alternative mixes that have less embodied carbon materials, but if it is not readily available in the local plants and batch plants, we can find a way to make it happen. How do we as designers help figure out how to make alternative products more readily available? And
Melanie, I've seen you have responded to that question and have 9 projects currently going on with low carbon concrete. Would you feel comfortable coming off mute and telling us a little bit about those projects?
Sure, and I'll turn my camera on as well briefly. Maybe if I can click the right button. Hi, everyone. I'm Melanie. I'm a sustainability consultant with HIT Contracting here in DC, and we are working on several projects that do have low carbon concrete requirements. A lot of them are client driven. If a client has embodied carbon reduction goals, they are asking for a certain percentage of reduction, and of course we do that primarily through concrete in particular. There's a handful that are in the tech and data world for those types of clients. And then there's also a new project, public knowledge now in the DC market. It's going to be a multifamily apartment complex, about 750 units on the east side of the Anacostia, that will be ILFI zero carbon and LEED platinum. And they are utilizing low carbon concrete for the reduction. So they're all currently in progress. I wish I had a better answer, but at this point we are seeing it now from many clients, many projects, both in the tech world and without tech. So it's definitely an interesting time with my team lately.
I think volumes play a part in convincing. Yeah, what volumes are you looking at?
So at the moment, our largest project is about 85,000 cubic yards. And then there's another project that will end up somewhere around 40 to 50,000 cubic yards. It really kind of depends on the project, but largest at the moment is just shy of 100,000 cubic yards of concrete.
Hey, Melanie, could you share who the structural engineers are and who the mix companies are for those projects, in particular, the larger?
Yeah, so there's a variety at the moment. We're seeing a lot from SKNA, structural engineers in particular. And then my top concrete suppliers are going to be Baker, Miller & Long, and then one of our other projects is with Schuster Concrete. They are all using different ready mix providers. Some of them are using Vulcan, some are using Titan, some are using Lehigh. There's a lot of really interesting individual items that go into play. I actually wrote my master's thesis on embodied carbon in concrete, so I do this a lot. And it really kind of depends on the project goals, and you can sort of pick and choose almost what areas to work on, depending on your concrete supplier in general and what their experience is. But top of the mind traditionally is going to be Baker out of DC.
Thanks for sharing, Melanie. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, is it classic like type 1 variants like type 1L or type 1S, or is it a combination of different mixes?
At the moment, one of the projects that we're currently working on is going to be type 1L. We're still waiting on structural engineer approval for that, supporting a different cementitious mix to with additional limestone out of the 1L We have seen some indication from the EcoPact products, which come out of Holcim, I believe. And then we've also seen some come out of like their different eco lines with the actual cement components. Lehigh has one, Vulcan has another. It really just kind of depends on the structural integrity of the mix itself. But for the most part, all I've seen so far has been that switch to 1L.
Yeah, and we actually have someone from Holcim on the line. Cecile, you've mentioned some projects that your team has rolling. If you'd like to share some more detail, please. Oh, sorry, we don't have your audio.
Okay, that should be better.
Oh, we had it for a moment, but we just lost it again.
Okay. Okay, sorry. Sorry, guys. Cecile Romans, I work for Holcim, and I'm especially in charge of promoting low carbon concrete across the US, so not only for the DC area, but everywhere where we operate. So in DC, our first big project was the resident hall for Georgetown University in downtown DC. We had mixes up to 50% CO2 reduction when you compare to standard straight cement mixes. So that was a really nice project. And we also have some high early strength mixes. So for you, I mean, I'm saying that just in general to say that we have never seen any specs with longer strength development, like 50 days and 90 days. We never see that. Everybody wants concrete that will gain strength very fast. And actually, we are able to do that even with low carbon concrete by using admixtures. So it requires a bit more work on the mix design development, but it's feasible. And even for like 3 days strength, so you can remove the formwork quite fast, and for slabs, and it's not only for foundations and things that could take time. Like it's also feasible for flat work. So that was the first big project. And now we have so the 9th NW, which is also in DC. It's a private project, so we were quite happy to have this one because it shows that also private money can fund. It's not only universities and the government that will be funding low carbon projects, so that's also very interesting. And now we've had our first data center also, so that's in Virginia. That's super recent, and we are very happy with that because it's a big customer. I guess you can all guess who the client is, and it's really a big thing for us to see that they actually not only talk about sustainability but do it on their projects. So it's really nice. Yeah, I mean, we can do many things, and what we do is, so the name is EcoPact that you mentioned, Melanie. We use slag heavily. We can go up to 70% replacement rate. So that's where the 50% CO2 reduction comes from. And we have EPDs and everything to support that. And we also use fly ash in different regions where slag is not available in the US. Because on the East Coast and well, actually wherever you have access to the sea, you can get some slag quite easily. But when you're in Colorado or Texas, it's very challenging. So we have still some sources of good fly ash, good quality ash. We are looking at ground glass, but it's not really, it doesn't really work. It doesn't really perform as slag or fly ash or cement. It's more filler, so you still reduce the CO2, but you don't get the same strength result for the concrete with ground glass. I mean, so far with what we've tested, and we still hope it can be used, but it's so far it's not really convincing. And we use silica fumes, but that can only be a very small amount of replacement, like up to 10% maximum, and for specific properties also that you're looking for. So it's yeah, I would say slag and fly ash are the most common and the ones that we understand better for concrete right now.
Thank you so much for that, Cecile. One piece that you mentioned that I wanted to underline is that the creativity you can take based on the different applications. You know, mixes for your foundation doesn't need to match the mix in your slab, and it provides, you know, a little bit more creativity on site. Something else Cecile mentioned was that, you know, she hasn't really encountered any longer term strength requirements. It's still very much, you know, 3 days is still the gold standard. I know we have a lot of designers on the line here. I'm wondering if any of y'all would be willing to come off mute and kind of speak to the you know, historical context on 3-day strength, and that how that might be able to change and what some of the challenges to extending strength requirements could be.
Hi there. The biggest challenge is just time and the schedule. That's the most costly thing for our client, is if it's usually a hard no if we ask them to extend the turnover schedule to get to the next floor. So if you're climbing the building, and the taller the building it is, even adding 2 or 3 days to that schedule for anything over 3 or 4 stories is usually a complete non-starter for the client. So completely interested in hearing about any mixes and any creative mixes or admixtures that you have out there that will reduce that turnover time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fair point, Jared, and I think speaks to you know, some requirements are going to be hard and fast when you're putting one floor on top of the other, but there's also opportunity within the kind of whole project design of, you know, can we put like, are there aspects of our pour that can be where, you know, you can layer the timelines in which you know, you don't run into as big schedule delays. Takes a bit of creativity though, which speaks to that earlier point of, you know, communicating early and often.
Has anyone here done that with a schedule, with a construction schedule, sort of layered it in a different and creative way where maybe some of those timelines could have been extended? Or maybe come across a situation where it could have happened and maybe that just you know, it didn't work out for whatever reason? I'm just interested. Or maybe for the RMI folks, have you all heard of a project that has been able to do that with their concrete mixes?
Only anecdotally. So over the last year or so, we've presented this guide in a few different geographies up in New England and in Colorado and also out on the West Coast. And it all seems hypothetically possible from conversations that we've had with stakeholders and their kind of experiences. But you know, we haven't found the explicit case study where, you know, lightning struck and they were able to have this aha moment and provide this layering. I think, you know, to Jared's point as well, it really depends on the client. And, you know, maybe some of Cecile's clients might be open to that level of flexibility of, you know, being able to show the cost benefit of, if the schedule goes out by 10 days, like this is our potential carbon savings, that kind of thing. But again, it's the nature of, you know, individual projects being so specific. You know, we know that a lot of concrete producers have really the world at their fingertips. You know, in addition to the kind of standard SEMs, you know, admixtures and kind of next generation SEMs provide a lot of creativity, but finding the right, you know, the right developer or client to make space for that is a challenge.
Yeah, it really seems like all of these sort of have to be taken into account earlier in design and see what can be used, what can kind of work together to make it all work. Evaluate costs too, and maybe even evaluate the social cost of carbon and how that compares with the cost it takes to implement some of these strategies. A lot of things that come into play that can kind of be evaluated early on in design.
Right, and when it comes to cost, I might take an angle for the few policymakers we have on the line. For a concrete producer to introduce more SEMs and more mixes, that comes at an infrastructure cost, right? They might need to add more silos to hold their material at the plant. They might run into permitting challenges of adding those silos in the first place, depending on what kind of geography, how urban their environment could be. And they also, as a part of that upfront expenditure of like that infrastructure cost of bringing SEMs into a market, they need to make sure that there's a return on that investment. So seeing projects go up with type 1L and things like that can help to send that signal. But there's also broader policy context that we've seen across the US. The city of Portland is making all their sidewalks with type 1L. New York put out a bill called LECLA. There's low embodied carbon. Basically, it puts a 5% cost discount on the bid with the lowest embodied carbon in a project evaluation cycle. And there's policy efforts like that can send a stronger demand signal to concrete producers that allows them to make the leap for infrastructure cost, which in turn gives them an onus to provide that marketing and engagement when they're working with design and developers and clients, as it's something that they have more readily on hand. I'm curious, any of the policymakers in the audience, if they're seeing any embodied carbon, whether it's global warming potential limits or things like that coming down the pipeline in the greater DC area.
Hi, this is Connor Reddy from DOEE, the DC Department of Energy and Environment. We have seen interest in that. Our Green Building Advisory Council, which is a body of public, private, and nonprofit sector representatives, is currently working with some folks at RMI and CLF to hopefully put together a bill that they hope to propose to council through the support of a couple council members. But it's still in the very early days.
Thanks so much for that, Connor. And if I could plug another CLF tool, or the Buildings Transparency is a group that spun out from the Carbon Leadership Forum and maintains the EC3 tool, which is a database of environmental product declarations and allows you to kind of search and filter more readily through that. As Cecile was mentioning EPD requirements in projects that we're seeing pop up at jurisdictions across the US, and that Building Transparency provides a tool to just kind of poke around and access some of that information that might not be at your fingertips today.
Awesome, thanks.
The CLF also has their material baselines document, which is great, which is sort of is used in that Building Transparency EC3 tool to compare materials. But it's basically a document that sets baseline limits of embodied carbon for different carbon intensive materials. So that's also a great way to kind of just check on your materials, see if they're below that baseline, and make sure you're kind of on track to reducing embodied carbon. And send a link to that as well.
Any other person on the call want to share their experiences on either working on a project that requires low embodied carbon, cement, concrete, or steel, or otherwise, just any barriers that they're facing that we could all brainstorm solutions for?
Radhika, I'll just flag, there was an interesting question in chat on geopolymers. I don't know much about it, and I'm wondering if David or anyone else would feel comfortable sharing more about that solution and some of the real world applications that they've seen. Just genuinely curious to learn about that solution.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
This is David Peabody. I'm an architect in Alexandria. We're looking into, I found these people on the internet called Geopolymer Tech, and they make a product, a cement product that they believe is going to be, I think they say something like 80% reduction in carbon in this product. But I'm just looking into it now. It's one of the reasons I tuned in here. I'd be interested if anybody here has heard about these.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, David.
So I think when you mentioned geopolymer, from my knowledge, but I'm not a really specialist, it's you use only slag instead of cement, so you use almost 100% slag in the concrete mix, and then you activate the slag using admixtures and different chemicals. So that's where the CO2 reduction comes from, because you almost don't use cement. But then it's there are some questions around the amount of chemicals that you will need to really make the concrete work. And is it truly sustainable? Because of course you reduce the CO2, but then you introduce a lot more of other products. And I don't think there are any standards that cover that in the US, so that's also another concern. So far I know we've done that in the UK within the group, but we are still very cautious about that kind of process. Because to handle the chemicals, there are also some health and safety issues at the plant that needs to be taken care of. So I would say it might be feasible, but it's a bit of a different process from concrete, and definitely not very scalable. I mean, to do that at any concrete plant is right now it's not feasible, at least for us. But maybe some specific companies find a way to do it at scale. I don't know.
I think I'll just jump in. I think these people are doing it in roads, and it's primarily used right now in roads, not in buildings. But when I spoke to them, they said they'd be happy to make a mix for any ready mix contractor. They also said that they're not using the old, apparently there's an old-fashioned way to do these geopolymers, which uses caustic soda, which is very dangerous, and uses liquid activators, I believe, and they have a different process. So I would just, I think it's worth looking into, and smart people like you guys who know more about this than we architects do. And it's called Geopolymer Tech. If you just Google them, I think you'll find them. The man's name is Rodney Zubrod, Z-U-B-R-O-D. He was the chief technical officer there. Thanks.
Thanks, David. We'll definitely look into it.
Cecile, you had also mentioned earlier in chat, there was a question around sequestration. And I'll answer your second question first, in that we haven't seen CO2 sequestration in aggregates just yet. I think, you know, there's a question if you're doing, you know, sequestration of CO2 via mineralization to make carbonate rock, and then using that, you know, carbonate rock in your aggregate. But again, I haven't seen that application come up anywhere. And in the Concrete Solutions Guide, we reference a Nature paper that came out early 2021 that looked at sequestration of CO2 in concrete that we found really interesting. First, there's the two different ways that you can sequester CO2 in concrete, either in the curing process or in the mixing process. And this Nature article looked at both kinds. But the real challenge is from like a life cycle perspective of the CO2, depending on how you got it, how far you needed to transport it, et cetera, the net impact of actually sequestering CO2 was really all over the map. Some projects did demonstrate like carbon reduction, but others did not, based on the sourcing, the uptake, and things like that. What's more is that concrete naturally absorbs CO2 over its lifetime, and I think there's open questions on the levels of measurement and uptake there, and how introducing more CO2 in the mixing process, which is generally the better, the higher quality or the lower risk of not having environmental benefit, we've seen through mixing. There's a question of how much CO2 you introduce during mixing, how that affects the life cycle kind of passive uptake of CO2 in concrete. There was one last point that I had, but I think it's escaped me. So basically, we're excited about the prospect of embodied carbon sequestered in concrete, because it's relatively at cost parity already in places across the US, and gets folks talking about embodied carbon in a very specific way. But I think it's a developing technology, and as we get better measurement and better projects in place to understand that impact, we'll be able to see that more clearly, the value that it brings.
Okay, thank you. On our side, like from our team, we are moderately excited about that, because we think that from testing that we've done also in-house, like we've tested it at multiple times. We don't really see the CO2 being, if you measure it, it's going to be maybe 2-3% reduction for your concrete mix compared to what it would have been without it. So it's still a small part. It's still something, but it's not really a huge impact. And you definitely can't count on that technology to sequester all the CO2 in the world, which, some people are talking about that, like using concrete to store CO2 as a reliable solution. But right now, what we are doing in injecting CO2 in fresh concrete before it sets, it's not going to be scalable. Like it's only 1-2% of just the concrete CO2 emissions. So not mentioning the rest of the CO2 emissions in the world. But I'm more interested in CO2 in aggregate. I would love it to work and be a really good solution to be able to store a significant amount of CO2, because I've heard of some claims that concrete with CO2 in aggregate would be carbon neutral. So that would be amazing. I don't know if it's proven yet and if it's working. I know there are some different companies also looking at the concept, but to me that would be really a great thing. Like if we can make that work, and maybe the amount of CO2 that would be sequestered through the aggregate could be matching the initial CO2 that was emitted during the cement and concrete manufacturing. So that could be nice. But yeah, CO2 injection in fresh concrete is still very limited from my point of view.
Yeah, Cecile, you've reminded me of the last point, in that the amount of CO2 you can sequester in concrete is dependent on the amount of cement So like the more cement you have as a part of your blend, the more CO2 you're able to sequester. And so as we look towards SCMs and reducing the amount of cement in our concrete mixes, that also reduces the capacity for CO2 sequestration in that way. Though you bring up some really interesting points on aggregates. Radhika might be interested to follow up with you on some of those points.
Sure.
And maybe answering your other question in chat, Cecile, you had a question on EPDs for carbon sequestration. I cannot recall any example, or I don't think I've ever seen any, but I'm curious if someone has different knowledge on this, or if you maybe wanted to expand on what you meant by EPDs for carbon sequestration as a service.
Yeah, my question was really about how much CO2 was actually sequestered or avoided through this solution. And because it's, we hear a lot about this process, but I've never seen any numbers. So I was just curious about how much kilograms of CO2 per cubic meter or cubic yard were sequestered. So that's just, and maybe someone, because we don't use that solution, so we don't have all the data. But maybe someone else from a different project would have.
Yeah, and as Charles mentions in chat, the EC3 tool would probably be a good place to start. But happy to hear from the audience if anyone has any experience they'd like to share.
I'm not sure that I have any direct experience, but I know that Vulcan has been creating EPDs for a lot of their mix designs in the area, and they do use some carbon sequestration technology like Carbon Cure. So it is likely, and it would be interesting to see if they do have an EPD for a mix design that does include that Carbon Cure technology, and then an equivalent mix design that maybe doesn't include that carbon sequestration, then comparing the two. That could be a good way to do it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and thanks for all the questions in chat and the experts we were able to speak with today. I think we've answered all of them. If anyone has any additional questions, feel free to shout them out or get in touch with us. And thanks again to CLF DC for having us here today. It was great to be with you all.
I want to echo that.
So
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in July for our MEP 2040 session.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Good one.
Thanks,
Bye
guys.
all.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.